Section 4 of Wayside and Woodland Trees, a Pocket Guide to the British Sylva, by Edward Stepp. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Native Trees and Shrubs, Part 4. The Willows, Salix. There is not in the whole of the British flora another genus of plants that presents such difficulties of identification as the genus Salix. Even so hardened a botanist as Sir J.D. Hooker, in reviewing the tangle of species, varieties (natural and cultivated) and hybrids, is so far stirred from his ordinary composure that he stigmatizes it as a troublesome genus. When Sir Joseph chose that mild adjective he was at Kew, surrounded by the national herbaria, and with nicely labelled living plants at hand for comparison. What then can the rambling nature lover hope to do with the willows when he comes across one at a time, without much chance of comparing? He must be content to follow the lumpers, who group a number of these uncertain forms under the name of a species to which they have evident relationship. When he has mastered the distinctions between these aggregate species, it will be early enough to attempt the segregation of the forms and varieties under each. In their natural condition willows are graceful and picturesque, but a large number of the examples met with in our rambles have been so altered for commercial reasons as to be more grotesque than beautiful. It is not the timberman who is responsible this time for a pollard willow, though it produces a shock head of long tender shoots, suitable for basket rods, lets in moisture at the top of the bowl, and the wood is more or less decayed and worthless. Only 4 of our native willows can be regarded as timber trees. These are the white willow, the crack willow, the Bedford willow, and the sallow. Like the poplars, their growth is very rapid, and their wood is consequently light, but it has the advantage of poplar wood in being tougher, and therefore serving for purposes where poplar is of no value. In the present day the growers of straight boled willows find their best market among the makers of cricket bats. A good deal of it is also cut into thin strips for plaiting into chip hats and hand baskets. The osier is grown in extensive riverside beds for the production of long, pliant shoots for the basket weavers, though many of the so-called osier rods are really stool shoots from willows that have been pollarded, or whose leading shoot has never been allowed to grow. On those parts of our coast where the crab and lobster fishery is pursued, a regular supply of such shoots for weaving into pots and hullies is a necessity, and a withy bed will usually be found on some valley stream near, or on a damp terrace halfway up the cliffs. The bark of the tree willows has long been known to be rich in an alkaloid called salicine, which has tonic and astringent properties, and has often been used instead of quinine, though it is not nearly so powerful as the Peruvian drug. The bark is also used for tanning. The association of the willow with sadness is very old, but there does not appear to be any satisfactory reason for it. Certainly to contemplate a naturally grown willow that grows on the edge of a limpid stream, in which its graceful shoots and slender leaves are reflected, does not suggest sad thoughts to the average healthy mind. The association is chiefly with maidens forsaken by their false lovers, as indicated by Shakespeare when he makes Desdemona say: "My mother had a maid called Barbara. She was in love, and he she loved proved mad, and did forsake her. She had a song of willow, an old thing 'twas, but it expressed her fortune, and she died singing it." The crack willow, or withy (Salix fragilis), is one of the 2 most considerable of our tree willows. In good soil it will in 20 years attain nearly its full height, which is 80 or 90 feet. Its bole sometimes has a girth of 20 feet. Its smooth, polished shoots afford the best ready means of distinguishing it, for instead of their base pointing to the centre of the trunk as in other trees, they grow obliquely, so that the shoots frequently cross each other. They are both tough and pliant, but if struck at the base they readily break off. This character explains the names crack willow and fragilis. The leaves are lance shaped, 3 to 6 inches long, smooth with glandular teeth, pale or glaucous on the underside, and with half heart-shaped stipules, which, however, are soon cast off. As we have already indicated under the head of Poplars, the male and female catkins of the Willows are borne by different trees. In the case of the Crack Willow, the male catkins are an inch or two long, proportionately stout, each flower bearing 2 stamens, occasionally 3, 4, or 5. The female catkin is more slender, the flowers each containing a smooth ovary, ending in a short style that divides into 2 curved stigmas. The catkins appear in April or May. Although, like most of the Willows, this species is fond of cold, wet soil in low situations, it is not restricted to the plains. In Northumberland it is found at 1,300 feet above the sea. Its northward range extends as far as Ross shire, but it is a doubtful native in both Scotland and Ireland. The Bedford Willow (S. russelliana) is believed to be a hybrid between S. fragilis and S. alba. It grows to a height of 50 feet with a girth of 12 feet. The leaves are more slender than those of S. fragilis, taper to a point at each end, and are very smooth on both sides. It occurs in swampy woods. The White Willow (Salix alba) is so called from the appearance of the leaves as the light is reflected from their silky surfaces, which are alike above and below. It is a tree from 60 to 80 feet high, with a girth of 20 feet, covered with thick and deeply fissured bark. The leaves are from 2 to 4 inches long, of a narrow elliptical shape. In the typical form the twigs are olive coloured, but in the variety Vitellina, known as the Golden Willow, these are yellow or reddish. In the variety Caerulea, the old leaves become quite smooth above, but retain the glaucous appearance of the underside. The White Willow is found as far north as Sunderlandshire, but although it is believed to be an indigenous species, most of the modern specimens appear to have been planted. It affords good timber, and the bark is almost equal to that of oak for tanning. A great number of the old willows met with in our rambles are partially decayed, a condition frequently the result of lopping large branches, for the wound never heals, and decay setting in at that point extends down the bole. Upon such decaying specimens one may often find one of the most handsome of our native beetles, the musk beetle, with long slender body and long antennae, all coloured in dark golden green, and diffusing the aroma of a rose. The almond-leaved or French willow (Salix triandra) is a small tree about 20 feet high, distinguished by its bark being thrown off in flakes. Its slender lance-shaped leaves are smooth green above and glaucous beneath, 2 to 4 inches long, and with half heart-shaped stipules. The male flowers offer another distinguishing mark in their stamens, being 3 in number. Its habits are the banks of rivers and streams, and in osier beds. It is extensively grown on account of the long straight shoots produced from the stump when the tree is cut down, which are of great use in wicker work. The Bay-leaved Willow (Salix pentandra) is met with either as a small upright tree about 20 feet high, or as a shrub 8 feet high. Its oval or elliptical leaves are rich green, smooth and sticky on the upper surface, and give out a pleasant fragrance like those of the Bay tree. They vary from an inch to 4 inches long, and they may or may not bear stipules, but if these are present they will be egg-shaped or oblong. The stamens are normally 5 in each flower, but they vary up to 12. This is reputed to be all of our willows the latest to flower. A line drawn through York, Worcester, and North Wales will give roughly its southward range as a native species. South of that line it has been planted, north of it to the Scottish border it is a native. It has been found growing at a height of 1,300 feet in Northumberland. The Sallow (Salix caprea) is the only other species that can properly be considered as a tree, as it attains to a height of 30 feet, though 15 to 20 feet is a more common measurement. Lance-shaped, and from 2 to 4 inches in length. In the typical form, which occurs chiefly in woods, dry pastures, and hedgerows, they are broad, smooth, and dull green above, covered with soft white down beneath, the stipules half kidney shaped. This is the earliest of all our Willows to flower, and the gold, male, and silver, female, catkins are put out before the leaves. In the country within a few miles of the larger cities this can hardly be a desirable species to plant, for on the Sunday before Easter thousands who at no other period exhibit any strong religious tendency journey out to pick some palm, as they designate the sallow bloom, and the rough pruning the sallows then get must in many cases be disastrous. He who imagines that insect life is suspended until spring is on the verge of summer should visit the woods when the sallow is in bloom. He will be astonished at the swarms of bees and moths that are collecting the abundant pollen or sipping the nectar provided for them. Before the bright catkins can be seen, the locality of the tree may be known by the loud hum produced by hundreds of pairs of wings. This all but invariable rule among the Willows, as among oaks, beech, birch, hazel, and pines, is to depend upon the wind for the transfer of pollen from one tree to the stigmas of another of the same species. But in the sallow we find a breaking away from what was doubtless the primitive arrangement in all flowering plants, by the bribing with honey of more reliable and less wasteful winged carriers. The Grey Sallow (Salix cinerea) is really a subspecies of S. caprea. It has a liking for moister places than the type, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that its growth in moister situations has brought about the differences by which it is separated from the parent form. These points are, briefly, the buds and twigs are downy, the leaves smaller and proportionately narrower, the upper surface downy, grey-green beneath, the anthers of the male pale yellow, the capsule of the female smaller. The Eared Sallow (S. aurita) is probably also only another form of S. caprea, distinguished by its small bush-like proportions, 2 to 4 feet high, long branches and red twigs, its small wrinkled leaves, which are usually less than 2 inches long, are of an almost oblong shape, downy beneath, and with large ear-shaped stipules. Its likeness is much closer to S. cinerea than to the type. It is fond of damp copses and moist places on heaths, where it may be found at considerable elevations. In the Highlands it ascends to 2000 feet. There are Willows of dwarf habit, some with long straggling branches and more or less prostrate stems, that grow upon heaths. Each has a name under which it has at some time or other been ranked as a distinct species, just as the forms of Bramble and Rose have been. The differences between them are minute, and of little interest, save to the advanced scientific botanist, who with his dried specimens spread before him, often detects subtle distinctions not apparent to the outdoor student of the living plant. For the purposes of those for whom this volume is intended, they may be regarded as one. Dwarf Silky Willow (Salix repens). It is a low bush from 6 to 12 inches high, the stem lying along the ground. Some of the branches straggle in the same fashion, but those which bear the flowers are more or less erect. The leaf buds and the young leaves are silky, a condition that usually endures on the lower surface, and in some forms on the upper also. They are broadly or narrowly lance shaped, varying in the different forms alluded to above. In size they range from a half to 1½ inches in length, and may have lance shaped stipules, or none at all. The scales of the catkins are yellowish green or purple, with dark tips. After they have shed their pollen, the anthers turn black. One form or other of this species will be found in all parts of the British Islands where there are heaths or commons. In the Highlands it occurs as high as 2500 feet. Another group of small Willows that form bushes (rarely a small tree) have been united under 2 species, the dark-leaved Willow (Salix nigricans) and the tea-leaved Willow (Salix filicifolia). None of them occur south of Yorkshire, and the chief distinction between the 2 species consists in the leaves of S. nigricans turning black when being dried for the herbarium, while those of S. filicifolia do not. The Osier (Salix viminalis) Many of the foregoing Willows, when cut down low and induced to send out long slender shoots, are known as Osiers, but only 2 species are botanically regarded as Osiers, this and the Purple Osier (S. purpurea). The present species may remain as a shrub or grow into a small tree, 30 feet high, with long, straight branches, which are silky when young, but afterwards become polished. The leaves vary in length from 4 to 10 inches, and are slenderly lance shaped, tapering to a point in front and narrowing into the foot stalk behind. They have waved margins without teeth, and the upper surface netted with veins, the under surface silvery and silky; stipules narrow lance shaped. The Osier may be seen in osier beds and wet places generally throughout the country as far north as Elgin in Argyll. There are several varieties and hybrids. The Purple Osier (Salix purpurea). In all the other Willows mentioned the stamens, whatever their number, all have the filaments distinct from each other. In this species alone the filaments of the 2 stamens are more or less united. The Purple Osier gets its name from the red or purple bark which clothes the thin but tough twigs. It is a shrub, and grows from 5 to 10 feet high. The leaves, which are rather thin in texture, are from 3 to 6 inches long, of slender lance shape, with toothed edges, smooth and glaucous on both sides, but especially beneath, somewhat hairy when young. They are almost opposite on the twigs, and when dried for the herbarium turn black. There are several varieties of this shrub, which were formerly honoured with specific rank. There remains a group of several small species of very local occurrence, with which we can do little more here beyond naming them. The Woolly Willow (Salix lanata) is a small shrub, 2 or 3 feet high, with twisted branches, woolly twigs, and hairy black buds. The broad egg shaped or oblong leathery leaves are also woolly, and 2 or 3 inches long. There are half heart shaped stipules at the base of the very short leaf stalk. It is an alpine plant, and is found about the mountain rills of Perth, Forfar, Inverness, and Sutherland at elevations between 2000 and 2500 feet. Conspicuous in spring for its rich golden catkins. Sadler's Willow (S. sadleri), of which only 2 or 3 specimens have been found, in Glen Calliter, 2500 feet, is probably a form of this species. The Lapland Willow (Salix lapponum) is of a similar proportion to the last named, sometimes erect, sometimes trailing. Its leaves are more elliptic in shape, covered above with silky hairs and below with cottony filaments. In lanata the raised veins form a network pattern. In lapponum they are straight. The stipules at the base of the long foot stalk are similar or altogether wanting. Like the preceding species, it is restricted to Scotch alpine rocks, at elevations between 2000 and 2700 feet. The Whortle leaved Willow (Salix myrsinites) is a small, wiry, creeping or half erect shrub, 6 inches to a foot high, with toothed, dark glossy leaves, an inch or less in length, whose net veining shows on both sides. It is restricted to the alpine parts of mid Scotland, from 1000 to 2700 feet. The Small Tree Willow (Salix arbuscula) is a small shrub, whose stem creeps along the ground and roots as it goes, sending up more or less erect branches a foot or 2 high. The downy twigs are first yellow, then reddish brown. The small leaves vary from egg shaped to lance shaped, and are shining above and glaucous beneath, toothed. In the Highlands of Aberdeen, Argyll, Dumfries, Forfar, and Perth, between 1000 and 2400 feet. The Least Willow (Salix herbacea) is not so restricted in its range, for it is found in all parts of the United Kingdom where there are heights sufficiently alpine, 2000 to 4300 feet, for its tastes. It is only an inch or 2 high, and has consequently the distinction of being the smallest British shrub. It is not so herbaceous as it seems, or as its name implies, for its shrubby stem and branches creep along underground, sending up only short scantily leaved twigs. The curled roundish leaves do not exceed half an inch in length, they are net veined, toothed, and shining. The catkins appear after the leaves. The net-leaved willow (Salix reticulata) is another of the Scotch Alpines. It is similar in habit to the last named, but larger, its berried branches sending up twigs a foot long. The roundish oblong leathery leaves are not toothed; they are smooth above and glaucous beneath, strongly net veined on either side. The purplish or yellow catkins do not develop till after the leaves. It is restricted to the mountains of Aberdeen, Forfar, Inverness, Perth, and Sutherland. The Weeping Willow (Salix babylonica), so conspicuous an ornament of riverside lawns, is an introduced species, whose slender branches hang downwards. It has large lance shaped, finely toothed leaves, smooth above and glaucous beneath. Further description of so well known a tree is unnecessary. It attains a height of 40 to 50 feet. The name Babylonica was bestowed in the belief that its headquarters were on the banks of the Euphrates. It is now known to be a native of Japan and other parts of Asia. The name Willow is the Anglo Saxon wellig, indicating pliancy, willingness. Our native Conifers. The British flora is singularly poor in coniferous plants, the Scots pine, the yew, and the juniper being our only native species, and even of these some authorities will have it that the yew is not truly a conifer at all. They place it in a separate order, Taxaceae. For our present purpose, however, although the yew does not produce cones, it will be convenient to keep it in its old position. The principal feature distinguishing all Conifers and their allies, Gymnosperms, from other flowering plants, Angiosperms, is briefly this. Angiosperms have their incipient seeds (ovules) enclosed in a carpel, through which a shoot from the pollen grain has to penetrate in order to reach and fertilize the ovule. In Gymnosperms the carpel takes the form of a leaf or bract, upon which the naked ovule lies open to actual contact with the pollen grain. After fertilization the carpel enlarges to protect the seed, and becomes fleshy or woody, in the latter case a group of carpels forming the well known cones of pine or fir. In some of the groups, as the yew, for example, the male or pollen producing flowers are borne by a separate tree from that which bears the female or cone producing flowers. In the pines both sexes are found on the same tree, but throughout the order the pollen is carried by the wind. All the species are trees or shrubs. They are among the most valuable of timber trees, and in addition yield a number of useful substances, such as pitch, tar, turpentine, etc. The leaves are always rigid, extremely narrow, and long in proportion, usually of the form that botanists term linear, with the two sides parallel. In the yew these leaves spread out in 2 rows from opposite sides of the twigs. In the pines they are in clusters of 2, 3, or 5, seeming to be bound together at the base by a wisp of thin skin. The number of leaves in each bundle is often a help in distinguishing species. The yew (Taxus baccata) lacks the graceful proportions of most of our trees, but it has for compensation a most obvious air of strength and endurance. Who doubts, as he gazes at some sombre yew in the old churchyard, the story of the local antiquarian who tells him the tree has so stood for 2000 years? He may perhaps mildly suggest that neither the tree nor the churchyard was in existence so far back, but even then the antiquarian will probably have the last word by suggesting that the grove of yews of which this formed part was the church of the past. Thousands see in cathedral aisles the reproduction in stone of the pine forest or the beech wood. Standing before an ancient yew they may see whence came the idea for those clustered columns. They actually exist in the bole of the yew, which presents the appearance not of a single trunk, but of several trunks that have coalesced. This condition is due to the yew continually pushing out new shoots from the lower parts of its bole, which take an upright direction, and coalesce with the old wood. Although the yew is a large tree, it is by no means a tall tree, the height of full grown yews in this country ranging between 15 and 50 feet, though they are said to attain a greater length in India. The bole of the yew is short but massive, covered with a thin red bark, that flakes off in patches much after the manner of plain bark. Large specimens have a girth of from 25 to 50 feet, or even more. Such a circumference represents the growth of many centuries, for the annual growth rings are very thin. It is this very slow growth that produces the hard, compact, and elastic wood that was so highly esteemed in the days of the longbow. Not only is the timber elastic and strong, but it is exceedingly durable, so that, it is said, a post of yew will outlast a post of iron. Its branches start from the trunk at only a few feet from the ground, and, taking an almost horizontal direction, throw out a great number of leafy twigs which provide a dense and extensive shade. These leaves are leathery in texture, curved somewhat after the manner of a reaping hook, shiny and dark above, pale and unpolished below. We have already mentioned that the Yew is a dioecious tree, that is, one whose male and female blossoms are borne on separate trees; but the statement requires qualification to this extent, that occasionally a tree will be found bearing a branch or branches whose flowers are of the opposite sex to those covering the greater part of the tree. The male catkin is almost round, a quarter of an inch across, and contains about half a dozen yellow anthers, the base surrounded by dry overlapping scales. They may be found during February and March in profusion on the underside of the boughs. The female flower is much smaller, and consists of a fleshy disc with a few scales at its base, and on this stands a single seed egg. After fertilization of the seed egg, the disc develops into a red wax-like cup around the enlarging seed, with its olive green coat. The flesh of this cup is full of sweet mucilage, which makes the fruit acceptable to children, but the flavour is rather too mawkish to suit older tastes. Yew berries are not poisonous, as sometimes supposed, neither is the contained kernel, which has a pleasant nutty flavour. Much has been said and written as to the toxic property of yew leaves, and it appears that though cattle and goats may browse upon them with impunity, horses and human beings pay the penalty of death for such indulgence. The word toxic, by the way, owes its significance to the yew. The tree was named Taxus in Latin from the Greek toxin, a bow, because of the ancient repute of its wood for making that instrument. The tree was held to be poisonous, and so its name, in the form of toxicum, came to designate all poisons. There are some lines in Memoriam which many readers of Tennyson have found as obscure as the shade of the yew where they were conceived. The poet is addressing a venerable churchyard yew in these words: "Old warder of these buried bones, and answering now my random stroke with fruitful cloud and living smoke, dark yew, that graspest at the stones, and dippest toward the dreamless dead, to thee too comes the golden hour, when flower is feeling after flower." To any readers who have found a difficulty in understanding these lines, we would say, visit the yew groves in February or March, when the male branches are thickly covered with their yellow flowers, and strike a branch with your stick. In response to the random stroke, the pollen will fly off in a fruitful cloud, or living smoke, some of it to be caught by the minute female blossoms. This is the yew tree's golden hour, when flower is feeling after flower. In the pre-gunpowder era, so important was it to have a sufficient supply of suitable wood for the making of the dreaded English longbow, that the culture of the yew was made the subject of a number of royal ordinances, which, of course, were allowed to drop out of observance when the bow was displaced by the firearm. And now, when men plant yews, they are mostly the ornamental varieties, such as the Irish or Florence court yew, which originated as a wild sport on the mountains of Fermanagh about 140 years ago. Evelyn, it is true, revived the interest in the yew as an ornamental tree, and it is with regret we add that at his suggestion it was first put to the base use called topiary work, which had hitherto been restricted to box and juniper. Evelyn showed how much more closely and continuously the yew could be clipped without affecting its vitality, and the fashion he thus set, and regarded as a merit, was very generally followed during the next century. Many of the atrocities of those days are still with us, but only as survivals, and we can so often agree with Evelyn that we may forgive him for having led our ancestors astray in this matter. Evelyn was by no means blind to the good points of the tree in its natural condition, as witness this quotation, which is as true to day as when it was written: "He that in winter should behold some of our highest hills in Surrey clad with whole woods of these two last sorts of trees (box and yew) for divers miles in circuit, as in those delicious groves of them, belonging to the honourable, my noble friend, the late Sir Adam Brown of Beckworth Castle, from Box Hill, might, without the least violence to his imagination, easily fancy himself transported into some new or enchanted country; for if in any spot in England, 'tis here eternal spring and summer all the year." Along the chalk range of which the celebrated Box Hill forms part will be found many fine examples of the Yew, as at Cherkley Court near Leatherhead, where there is an actual Yew forest. There was a monstrous Yew at Brabourne in Kent in Evelyn's time, for he tells us he measured it and found its girth to be only 1 inch short of 59 feet. There are numerous giants of the species still living in quiet country churchyards, where they have probably served, as tradition states of those at Fountains Abbey, as a shelter for the builders of the ancient church during its erection. It is reputed to be the longest lived of all trees, and it is to be hoped that no hindrance will be put in the way of these connections of the present with the far past living to their full natural limit, whatever it may be. It is naturally a tree of the uplands and lower hills, and shows a distinct preference for soils that contain plenty of lime. The Irish Yew (var. fastigata), to which passing reference was made, differs from the type in having all its branches growing erectly, after the manner of a Lombardy poplar, and in the leaves being scattered promiscuously over the branchlets instead of being 2 regular rows. It attains a height of 20 to 25 feet. End of section 4. Section 5 of Wayside and Woodland Trees, a Pocket Guide to the British Sylva, by Edward Stepp. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Native Trees and Shrubs, Part 5. The juniper, Juniperus communis, is seldom more than a shrub a few feet in height, though it occasionally develops into a small tree from 10 to 20 feet high, and with a girth of 5 feet. It has a fibrous red bark which flakes off like that of the yew. The leaves are shaped like a cobbler's awl, rigid and end in sharp points. They have thickened margins, the concave upper sides are glaucous, and they are arranged round the branches in whorls of 3. The male and female flowers are on separate trees. The male catkin may be known in May by its numerous anthers and pale yellow pollen. The female catkins will be found in the axils of the leaves, and resemble buds. The scales are fleshy, and after fertilization the upper ones slowly develop into the form of a berry, which has a few undeveloped scales at its base. They do not ripen until the following year, when they are blue-black, covered with a fine glaucous bloom. They have a pungent flavour which is utilized in concocting gin, which indeed owes its name to this fact, the word being merely a contraction of genevrier, the French form of juniper. The berries have long been known as a kidney stimulant, a fact which has been fully utilized as the justification of every gin drinker. A beautiful little moth, Hypsilophus marginellus, may often be taken about the juniper, upon which its caterpillar feeds. To appreciate the variety of forms assumed by the Juniper according to the elevation at which it grows, it should be seen on slopes like those of the North Downs in Surrey. One portion of the range at Mickleham is named Juniper Hill. In the valleys it may be found as a small, shapely tree; higher up the slopes as a pyramidal shrub, and as we reach higher and more exposed positions, the Juniper gradually dwindles to a low, shapeless bush. This, however, must not be confounded with a distinct variety to which the name Nana has been applied. It differs from the type in having shorter and broader overlapping leaves with curved tips. var. Nana is confined to the mountains of the north of our islands, and ascends to 2,700 feet, which is 300 feet higher than is recorded of the type. The Virginian Juniper (Juniperus virginiana), or Red Cedar, as it is called on the American continent, is a much larger plant, which is frequently planted in our parks and gardens. It varies in habit, and may be low and spreading, bush like, or tall and tapering, 30 to 40 feet high. Its leaves are in threes, like those of our native species, but the three are united by their bases. It is with the red heartwood of this tree that our cedar pencils are covered, large quantities of the timber of J. virginiana, and formerly of J. bermudiana, being imported for this purpose. The Virginian Juniper has been with us for many years. It is mentioned by Evelyn in his Sylva (1664), and is believed to have been introduced by him from North America. The Scots Pine (Pinus sylvestris), common but incorrectly styled Scotch Fir, is the typical pine tree of Northern Europe, where, especially in Russia and Northern Germany, it constitutes huge forests. It is even said to cover far wider tracts of country than any other forest tree. Although there is evidence that in ancient days it was pretty widely distributed over Britain, to day all those pine woods of southern England are the results of planting, and it is only in a few places between Yorkshire and Sutherland, and in Ireland, that it can be regarded as truly wild and indigenous. Mr. John Nisbet points out that the term pine forest is a bit of tautology, for the old German word Forst was derived from foraja, now represented by Forhe, a fir or pine, so that a pine forest is equivalent to pine. However, the etymologists will probably allow us to speak of pine woods, and we will try to remember that when we use the word forest it must always indicate an assemblage of pine trees. In favourable soil, at a moderate elevation, the Scots Pine is a fine tree 100 feet high, with a rough barked trunk, whose girth is 12 feet. Under such conditions it develops a strong tap root which goes deep, but where the soil is shallow or otherwise unfavourable the tap root is not developed. At great elevations the upward growth is checked early, and it becomes a mere evergreen bush. The branches are short and spreading, those on the lower portions of the trunk dying early, so that the tree soon gets that gaunt, weather beaten look that is so characteristic of it. Then, after the growth of the leading shoot has become feeble, the upper branches continue to lengthen, and so bring about that flat topped condition. Its growth is rapid, and in 20 years it will attain a height of 40 or 50 feet. The leaves, which are in bundles of 2, are from 2 to 3 inches long, very slender, grooved above, and convex beneath. They remain on the tree for over 2 years, and in their first season are of a glaucous hue, but in the second year this changes to dark deep green. Both male and female flowers are borne by the same tree. The male catkins are individually small (1/4 inch), but are combined in spikes. This and the abundant pale yellow pollen makes them conspicuous. The female cones are somewhat egg shaped, tapering to a point, which is often curved. They are usually in clusters of 3, and grow to a length of 2 or 3 inches. The scales are comparatively few, and their ends are thickened into an irregular 4-sided boss, at first ending in a little point. The seeds are winged, and contained beneath the scales. They take about 18 months to ripen, when the scales separate in dry, windy weather, and allow the breeze to pick out the seeds and send them flying through the air to a great distance. The pollen, too, it should be noted, is of a form specially fitted for aerial transport, each particle of pollen forming 2 connected spheres. It is quite a common experience in May to find little heaps of this pollen collected in hollows, and at the margins of ponds in the neighbourhood of pine woods, but so difficult is it to get people to understand the common facts of nature, that it is generally regarded as evidence of a shower of brimstone having fallen. It is not only the ignorant rustic who falls into this error, judging from the letters sent to the press by country parsons; even the universities fail to prepare their alumni to deal with such phenomena. After the eruptions of La Soufriere, Several wrote to say that quantities of powdered sulphur from St. Vincent had descended in their Surrey and Hampshire parishes; their notion being that the commercial flowers of sulphur are the direct produce of volcanoes. Although the wood produced by the Scots Pine in this country is not considered of the highest quality, the species is certainly of equal value as a timber producer with any other tree. Owing to our mild winters and long periods of seasonal growth, the Pine wood produced in Britain is coarse grained and not very durable. In the colder parts of Northern Europe, where summers are short and the long winters are severe, the texture of the timber is more solid and the grain closer. And so enormous quantities of Pine wood come to us from the Baltic ports every year. In addition to the timber, other valuable substances known to commerce are products of the Scots Pine, pitch and tar, resin and turpentine, for example. The Pine is an accommodating tree, for though it likes a deep soil in which to strike its tap root, it will grow upon rocky ground where the roots have to become horizontal and near the surface, or it will form forests on poor sandy soils, even on the loose hot sands near the seashore. This is a valuable power, because the fall of its needle gradually forms a humus, and so provides food for other plants which could not exist on raw sand. Other coniferous trees that have become more or less familiar in our plantations and parks will be found in the second division of this book. The Holly (Ilex aquifolium). The Holly must be regarded as one of our small trees, although many specimens attain a height of 40 or 50 feet, with a girth of 10 or 12 feet. It is well distributed throughout our islands, ascending to 1000 feet, and it is probable that no other tree is so well known, by its foliage at least, as the Holly, or Holm, to give its ancient name. The word Holm was incorporated by some of our ancestors far back in the name Holmesdale, which still attaches to the stretch of country at the southern foot of the chalk hills in Surrey, and whose proud motto is, "Never won, ne never shall." At the western end of the Holmesdale is Holm Wood, and still a little further west Holmbury. In these places the Holly still grows bravely, not far from the old home of John Evelyn, who must be thought of whenever we talk of Hollies, though the recollection has to do with Sayes Court, his Thameside house, where the barbarian Peter wrought such havoc with his cherished holly hedge. How Evelyn must have lamented that outrage is indicated in this extract from the Sylva. Is there, under heaven, a more glorious and refreshing object of the kind, than an impregnable hedge of about 400 feet in length, 9 feet high, and 5 in diameter, which I can show in my now ruined gardens at Sayes Court (thanks to the Czar of Muscovy), at any time of the year, glittering with its armed and varnished leaves? The taller standards at orderly distance, blushing with their natural coral. It mocks the rudest assaults of the weather, beasts, or hedge breakers, et illum nemo impune lacessit. The bark of the Holly is smooth and pale grey in colour. Time out of mind it has been used in the preparation of a viscid substance known as bird lime, which, spread on twigs, holds the feet of small birds. Respecting the foliage of the Holly, there is little need to say anything, but for uniformity's sake we may note that the leaves are oval in shape, of a leathery consistence, with a firmer margin, running out into long sharp spines. It is a fact worthy of note that when the Holly has attained to a height of 10 feet or so, it frequently clothes its upper branches in leaves that have no spines, a circumstance that Robert Southey sought to explain in his poem The Holly Tree, on teleological grounds. His second verse, however, contains sufficient explanation of the fact it describes. Below a circling fence its leaves are seen, wrinkled and keen. No grazing cattle through their prickly round Can reach to wound. But, as they grow where nothing is to fear, Smooth and unarmed the pointless leaves appear. In some places the young shoots are gathered by the peasants, dried, bruised, and used as a winter cattle food. No doubt, in the early history of the Holly, cattle found out its good qualities for themselves, and browsed upon the then unarmed foliage. In self defence the tree developed spines upon its leaves, and so kept its enemies at a respectful distance. Above the reach of these marauders the production of spines would be a useless waste of material. The flowers of the Holly, though small, are conspicuous by their great number and white colour. They are about 1/4 inch across, with 4 petals and 4 stamens or stigmas. Sometimes flowers with stamens are produced by the same tree that bears flowers with stigmas, but often the male and the female flowers are borne by separate trees, so that the possessor of a Holly that is solely male is sometimes puzzled by the fact that his tree, though covered with blossoms, never produces a berry. The fruit is analogous in structure to that of the plum and cherry, and is technically termed a drupe; but instead of the single stone of these fruits, in the Holly berry there are 4 bony little stones, each with its contained seed. The berries ripen about September, and are then scarlet and glossy, though here and there one finds a tree whose fruit never gets beyond the yellow stage of coloration. Most parts of the tree have had their uses in medicine, the leaves, for example, being said to have value as a febrifuge, and the berries as a purgative, or in large doses (6 to 8) as an emetic. The smooth bark of large Hollies is often attacked by one of the most striking of our native lichens, Graphis elegans, whose black fruiting portions look like a raised cuneiform inscription. The Holly is not greatly subjected to the attacks of insects, but many of its leaves will be found to have been tunnelled between the upper and lower skins by the larva of a minute moth, one of the leaf miners. It also provides the pabulum for the caterpillar of the Holly blue butterfly (Lycaena argiolus). The dead leaves may be examined for the minute prickly scale (Helix aculeata). The wood of the Holly has an exceedingly fine grain due to its slow growth, and it is very hard and white. These qualities make it valuable for many purposes, often as a substitute for boxwood, and, when dyed black, in lieu of ebony. The Spindle tree (Euonymus europaeus). The Spindle is right on the borderland between trees and shrubs, for though it will grow into a tree 20 feet high, yet our hedgerow specimens are usually bush like and only 10 or 12 feet high. Until the autumn the Spindle, we fear, is rarely recognized as such, but gets confused with the Buckthorn and Dogwood. In October, however, its quaint fruits have changed to a pale crimson hue, which renders them the most conspicuous feature of a hedgerow, even of one plentifully decorated with scarlet hips and haws and bryony berries. The unusual tint of the Spindle, and the fact that it swings on a slender stalk, at once mark it out from the rigid stalked hips and haws. The trunk of the Spindle is clothed in smooth grey bark; the twigs, which are in pairs, starting from opposite sides of a branch, are 4 angled. The shining leaves vary from egg shaped to lance shaped, with finely toothed edges. They are arranged in pairs, and in autumn they change to yellow and red. When bruised they give off a fetid odour. The juice is acrid, and said to be poisonous, a charge which is laid against the bark, flowers, and seed as well. The small greenish white flowers are borne in loose clusters, of the type known as cymes, from the axils of the leaves, and appear in May and June. Some contain both stamens and pistil, but others are either staminate or pistillate. The calyx is cut into 4 or 6 parts; the petals and stamens agree with these parts in number, but the lobes of the stigma only range from 3 to 5, corresponding with the cells of the ovary. The fruit is deeply lobed and marked with grooves, indicating the lines of future division, when the lobes open and disclose the seeds, at first covered with their orange jackets or arils, after the manner of the mace that encloses the nutmeg. The hardness and toughness of Spindle wood has long been esteemed in the fashioning of small wares where these qualities are essential, and the common name is a survival of the days when spinning was the occupation of every woman. Then spindles were in demand for winding the spun thread upon, and no wood was more suitable than that of Euonymus for making them. It shares with the cornel (Cornus sanguinea) the name dogwood; it is also skewer wood, prickwood, and pegwood, all suggestive of uses to which it is or was applied. The young shoots make a very fine charcoal for artists' use. The Spindle is indigenous throughout our islands, but cannot be said to be generally common; it is rarer in Scotland and Ireland than in England. Among the exotic species cultivated in our parks and gardens are the handsome variegated forms of the Evergreen Spindle (Euonymus japonicus) of China and Japan, and the Broad leaved Spindle (E. latifolius) from Europe. The Buckthorns (Rhamnus). Our two native species of Buckthorn are shrubs of from 5 to 10 feet in height. In this one respect they agree, in almost all others they differ. Both are Buckthorns in name, but the Breaking Buckthorn (Rhamnus frangula) is quite unarmed, whilst many of the branchlets of the Purging Buckthorn (Rhamnus catharticus) are hardened into spines. The Purging Buckthorn is distinguished by its stiff habit, and by some of the leaves being gathered into bundles at the ends of the shoots. The leaves are egg shaped, with toothed edges, and of a yellowish green tint, with short leaf stalks. The yellowish green flowers are very small, and will be found both singly and in clusters from the leaf axils. There are a 4 cleft calyx, 4 petals, 4 stamens, or 4 stigmas, for the sexes are usually on separate plants. The fruit is black, round, and about 1/4 inch across, containing 4 stones. These so called berries are ripe in September. Formerly they were much used as a purging medicine, but of so violent a character that their use has come to be discouraged, and the safer syrup of Buckthorn is prescribed instead. The juice of these berries is the raw material from which the artist's sap green is prepared. It may be found in woods, thick hedgerows, and bushy places on commons southward of Westmoreland, showing a decided preference for chalky soils. In Ireland it only occurs rarely. The Breaking Buckthorn (Rhamnus frangula) is also known as the Berry bearing Alder, its leaves, with their lateral veins, presenting something of the appearance of the Alder. Its more slender stems are purplish brown in hue, and all the leaves are arranged alternately up the stems. The leaves further differ from those of R. catharticus in having plain untoothed edges, and their veins parallel to one another. The flowers are similar in size to those of the other species, but are whiter, less yellow, fewer in number, and on longer stalks. The parts of the flower, too, are in 5s instead of 4s, and the berry, though similar to the previous species, is much larger (½ inch diameter). In an unripe condition these fruits yield a good green dye, much used by calico printers and others. The wood made into charcoal is said to be the best for the purposes of the gunpowder makers, who know it by the name of black dogwood. The straight shoots of both species are used for forming walking and umbrella sticks, and those of longer growth for pea and bean sticks. The Brimstone Butterfly (Goniopteryx rhamni) lays its eggs on the leaves of R. frangula, upon which the larva feeds. The name Buckthorn appears to be due to an ancient misunderstanding of the German name Buxdorn, which should have been translated Box thorn. Wild Plums (Prunus communis). With the single exception of the Hazel, all of our native fruit trees are members of the extensive and beautiful Rose family. Before Roman invasions brought improved and cultivated varieties, our rude forefathers must have been glad to eat the Sloes, Crabs, and Wild Cherries that are now regarded as too terribly crude and austere, in an uncooked condition, for any stomach but that of the natural boy, which appears capable of surviving any ill treatment. Some authors have regarded the Wild Plum and the Bullace as being specifically distinct from the Sloe and from each other, but the modern view is that their differences only entitle them to rank as sub species of the Sloe, and as such they will be regarded here. The Sloe or Blackthorn (Prunus communis) is the rigid many branched shrub with stiletto like tips, that luxuriates on some of our commons and in our hedgerows. The blackish bark that gives its name to the shrub forms a fine foil in March or April for the pure white starry blossoms that brave the cold blasts before the leaf buds dare unfurl their coverings. In some places, as in Cornwall, where it is the principal hedge plant, and where cliffs, creeks, and river banks are bordered by it, these bare black or purple stems are almost hidden by the abundant growth of the grey lichen (Evernia prunastri). In this, the typical form, the branches and twigs turn in every direction, so that it is impossible to thrust one's hand into a Blackthorn bush without getting considerably scratched. The well known flower consists of a 5-lobed calyx, 5 white petals, and from 15 to 20 stamens round the single carpel. The stigma matures in advance of the stamens, so that it has usually been fertilized by bee borne pollen from another sloe before its own anthers have disclosed their pollen. The fruit is about half an inch across, globose in form, and held erect upon its short stalk, black, but its blackness hidden by a delicate bloom that gives it a purplish glaucous hue. Terribly harsh are these fruits to the palate, and a mere bite at an unripe one is sufficient to set teeth on edge and contract the muscles of mouth and face. And yet, when the tight jacket of the sloe begins to relax and pucker, the juice condenses into more mealy flesh, and the acridity passes. One may eat not one but a dozen, slowly, enjoying the piquancy of each before swallowing. Country people make them into wine, and it used to be said that much is sold as port has in its origin the skins of British sloes instead of Portuguese grapes. And for special use, for the stomach's sake, old wife followers of St. Paul pin their faith to gin in which sloes have soaked for months. In the days of our youth it was a stock jibe against the grocer that most of his China tea had been grown on Blackthorn bushes not far from home, and with tea at 5 or 6 shillings a pound, there may have been some basis of truth for the belief. But with the prices of to day it may be presumed that Blackthorn leaves would cost the dealer at least as much as real tea leaves from Assam and Darjeeling. The Bullace (Prunus communis) subspecies insititia differs from the sloe in having brown bark, the branches straight, and only a few of them ending in spines, the leaves larger, broader, more coarsely toothed, and downy on the underside. The flowers, too, have broader petals, and the fruit, which may be black or yellow, droops, and is between 3/4 and 1 inch in diameter. In many places where this grows it can only be regarded as an escape from cultivation. The Wild Plum (Prunus communis, subspecies domestica) has also brown bark, its branches straight, and not ending in spines. The downiness noticed on the underside of the bullace leaves is here restricted to the ribs on the leaf. The fruit attains a diameter of 1 inch or 1 inch and a half. Although found occasionally in hedgerows, this subspecies is not indigenous in any part of our islands. Hooker says the only country in which it is really indigenous is Western Asia, but its numerous cultivated forms are widely distributed. It should be noted that the fruits of the Blackthorn and its subspecies are formed within the flower; so are those of the cherries, to be next described, the ovary being botanically termed superior, that is, above the base of the calyx and corolla, when the flower is in an erect position. This is a point of some importance when one seeks to understand the different formation of the fruit in so closely related a species as the apple, in which the ovary is inferior or below the flower. Wild Cherries (Prunus avium). Nature has been comparatively lavish in the matter of cherries, for she has bestowed 3 species upon the British Islands. For the cultivated cherry it is said that we ought to thank the Romans, as for many other good things in the way of food. Pliny states that we had the cherry in Britain by the middle of the 1st century A.D. Evelyn tells us that the cherry orchards of Kent owe their origin to the plain industry of one Richard Haynes, a printer to Henry VIII., by whom the fields and environs of about 30 towns, in Kent only, were planted with fruit trees from Flanders, to the unusual benefit and general improvement of the county to this day. It is probable, however, that our own countrymen had already effected some improvement on the wild sorts by cultivation, for even in the woods some trees are found bearing fruit much larger and of better flavour than usual, and such would be selected for cultivation. Our 3 natives are the wild or dwarf cherry (Prunus cerasus), the gean (P. avium), and the bird cherry (P. padus). Of these the gean is the species most widely distributed throughout our country, and therefore we give it precedence. The gean (Prunus avium) is a tree that in suitable soils attains a height of 30 or 40 feet, with short stout branches that take an upward direction. The leaves are large, broadly oval, with sharp toothed edges, and downy on the underside. They always droop from the branches, and in spring they are of a bronzy brown tint, which afterwards changes to pale green. Soon after the leaves have unfolded they are almost hidden by the umbels of wide open white flowers, which have soft heart shaped petals, and whose anthers and stigmas mature simultaneously. The firm fleshed drupe is heart shaped, black or red, sweet or bitter, with scanty juice which stains the fingers. This is believed to be the original wild stock from which our modern black hearts and Bigarreau cherries have been evolved by the cultivator. The dwarf or wild cherry, Prunus cerasus, is more bush like than tree like, for it sends up a great number of suckers around the main stem. The branches are slender and drooping; the leaves, which are of similar shape to those of P. avium, are smooth and deep blue green in tint, with round toothed edges. The flowers are not so widely open as in the previous species, but retain more of the cup shape, whilst the notched petals are firmer in consistence and oval in shape. The drupe is in this species round, with red skin and juicy flesh of a distinctly acid character. The juice does not stain as does that of P. avium. The Morello or brandy cherry, the May Duke, and the Kentish cherries are considered to be derived from this species. This does not extend further north than Yorkshire; in Ireland it is rare. The bird cherry, Prunus padus, forms a tree from 10 to 20 feet in height, with more elliptic leaves, which have their edges doubly cut into fine teeth. The flowers are not clustered in umbels as in both the foregoing, but in a loose raceme from lateral spurs of new growth. The flowers are erect when they open, and the stigmas mature before the anthers, so that cross fertilization is favoured in this species. After fertilization the flower droops, to be out of the way of the bees in their visits to the unfertilized blossoms. The petals in this species look as if their edges had been gnawed. The drupes are small, black, and very bitter, with a wrinkled stone. This is a northern species, not coming further south than Leicestershire and South Wales. All three species flower in late April or early May. Cherry wood is strong, fine grained, and of a red colour. It is easily worked and susceptible of a high polish, so that it is in request by cabinet makers, turners, and musical instrument makers. End of section 5. Section 6 of Wayside and Woodland Trees, a Pocket Guide to the British Sylva, by Edward Stepp. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Native Trees and Shrubs, Part 6. The Wild Pear, Pyrus communis. The wild pear is only to be found growing in the southern half of Britain, its northward range not extending beyond Yorkshire, and even in the south its claim to be regarded as a true native has been contested. Mr. Hewitt C. Watson regards it as more probably a denizen, that is, a species originally introduced by man, which has maintained its hold upon the new land. Upon this assumption it is probable that the introduced specimens were already somewhat cultivated, but when they, or their descendants, became wild, they reverted to the original condition of the species. The wild pear, or choke pear, is a small tree, from 20 to 60 feet in height, of somewhat pyramidal form. The twigs, which are usually of a drooping tendency, are also much given to ending in spines, a character scarcely apparent in the cultivated tree. The leaves, too, of the wild tree are more distinctively toothed than those of the garden pear. They are oval in shape, with blunt toothed edges, and downy on the lower surface. Along the new shoots the leaves are arranged alternately on opposite sides, but on shoots a year old they are produced in clusters. The flowers, which measure more than an inch across, are pure white in colour, and are clustered in cymes of 5 to 9. They appear in April and May, and are of the wild rose type, there being numerous stamens, from 3 to 5 styles, which ripen before the stamens, 5 petals, and the calyx, taking the form of a pitcher with a 5-lobed mouth, represents the 5 sepals. In speaking of the wild plums we directed attention to the fact that the ovary was within the flower. In the pear, and the other members of the genus Pyrus, it is below the flower, hidden away in fact within the calyx tube. When the flower opens it is ready for fertilization, but as the stamens of that flower are not yet mature, this can only be accomplished by pollen brought by the bees from other flowers as they rifle the honey glands. The effect of pollinization is to cause special vegetative activity in the neighborhood of the ovary, resulting in the thickening of the flesh of the calyx tube around it, until it has become of the characteristic pear shape and an inch or two in length. A section of a pear or apple, taken lengthwise, will show a faint green outline of the ovary, and will demonstrate how much of the flesh is really belonging to the calyx tube. The fruit of the wild pear is green until about November, when it turns yellow. It is of too harsh a character to be fit for eating. A pear formerly known as a variety, Brigisi, of Pyrus communis, is now regarded as a distinct species under the name of Pyrus cordata. It is found in Cornwall, and is distinguished by its more oval leaves being rounded at the base, and by its much smaller fruits often being globular. The pear is a long lived tree, that grows singly or in small groups on dry plains. It attains a height of about 50 feet in 30 years, and its girth may then be 3 or 4 feet. The timber is fine grained, strong and heavy, with a reddish tinge. Stained with black, it is used to counterfeit ebony. The Wild Apple (Pyrus malus). It is by no means an easy matter to decide whether the crab trees that grow along the hedgerows are truly wild or the offspring of orchard apples. In woods, away from gardens and orchards, there is less difficulty. Like the pear, the apple appears to have been the subject of cultural attention from very early times. This is proved by the philologists from the similarity of the equivalents for our word apple in all the Celtic and Sclavonian languages, showing by their common origin that the fruit was of sufficient importance to have a distinctive name long before the separation of the peoples of Northern Europe. The name of crab is of comparatively recent origin. Prior regards it as a form of the Lowland Scotch scrab, derived from the Anglo Saxon scrob, a shrub, indicating that it is an apple bush rather than an apple tree. The wild apple has not the pyramidal form of the wild pear, the branches spreading more widely when young, and drooping when older, so that the head is rounded. In height it varies as a tree from 20 to 30 feet, though many examples of good age still retain the dimensions of a bush. Owing to the spreading character of the branches, the diameter of the head often exceeds the height of the tree. The bole has seldom any pretensions to symmetry, and is usually more or less crooked like the older branches. The brown bark is not very rough, though its numerous fissures and cracks give it a rugged appearance. Its wood, like that of the pear, is hard and fine grained, but instead of having a reddish tinge there is a tendency to brownness. The leaves vary in shape, but are more or less oblong, smooth above, sometimes downy on the lower surface when young, and with toothed edges. The flowers are about the same size as those of the wild pear, but their white petals are beautifully tinted and streaked with pink. The small clusters are umbels, that is to say, the foot stalks of similar length start from a common base. The fruit is almost spherical, and instead of the foot stalk gradually merging into the apple, the attachment is always in a depression of the latter. In the typical form of the wild apple, the yellow and red fruit hang by their slender stalks, but there is a variety, metis, in which the fruit is borne above the stouter stalks. The variety may also be known by the downiness of the young leaves, the calyx tube, and the stalks. The fruit is about an inch across, and so rich in malic acid as to be unfit for food in its natural state, though children punish their digestive organs with it. Pigs are partial to crab apples, a taste they have evidently inherited from the wild boar. A delicious preserve, called crab jelly, is made by stewing the whole fruit, then pressing the soft flesh through a hair sieve, and boiling the pulp with sugar. Cider is made from the rotting crabs, also a kind of vinegar called verjuice or vargus. The wild apple is found all over the United Kingdom as far north as the Clyde, and wherever it is known to occur it is worth a special visit in May, when all its crooked branches and straggling shoots are rendered beautifully by the abundance of delicately tinted and fragrant flowers. It is also far from being unattractive in the autumn, when the miniature apples hang from the boughs. White Beam (Pyrus aurea). Owing to its very local occurrence, the White Beam, though widely distributed, is one of the less known of our trees and shrubs. It comes into both these categories according to the situation of its growth, for whilst in exposed mountainous localities a specimen of mature age may be no more than 4 or 5 feet high, and of bush like growth, under the lee of a wood, and on a calcareous soil, it will be an erect and graceful tree of pyramidal form, whose apex is 40 feet from the ground. In its early years growth is tolerably rapid, but at the age of 10 it slackens pace, and after it has attained its majority its progress is very slow. Its wood is fine grained, very hard, white, but inclining to yellow. The bark is smooth, and little subject to the cracks and fissures that mark the apple bark. The branches, except a few of the lowest, all have an upward tendency. The leaves vary considerably in the several forms or subspecies, but in the typical form they are a broad oval, with the edges coarsely toothed or cut into lobes, the upper side smooth, and the lower side clothed with white cottony down, the almost straight nerves strongly marked. The white flowers, which appear in May or June, are only half an inch across, and gather into loose clusters. They are succeeded by nearly round scarlet fruits, half an inch in diameter, known in Lancashire and Westmoreland as chess apples. The tree is also known in the same districts as sea owler, the latter word, according to Prior, being a corruption of aller or alder, probably from the resemblance of the plated leaves to those of Alinus glutinosa. These chess apples are very sharp and rough to the taste, but when kept like medlars, till they blet or begin to decay, are far from unpleasant. Birds and squirrels eagerly seek for them on the tree, and those that fall are as welcome to hedgehogs and other mammals. This form is only found from the Midlands to the south of England as far west as Devon, and in Ireland. The subspecies latifolia, Pyrus rotundifolia of some botanists, has broader leaves, varying from oval oblong to almost round, divided into wedge-shaped lobes, the cottony down beneath being grey rather than white, and the nerves less prominent on the underside. This form is found in Cornwall. The subspecies scandica, also known as Pyrus intermedia, has the leaves less tough, more deeply divided into rounded or oblong lobes, and the grey cotton beneath of a looser character. This form is found in Scotland. It should be noted that this species must not be called the White Beam tree, for the word beam is the Saxon equivalent for tree. Other names for it include hen apple, Cumberland hawthorn, hoar withy, quick beam, and whip crop. The wild service, Pyrus torminalis, is a small tree of local occurrence which does not extend further north than Lancashire. In general appearance it may be taken for the white beam, but closer inspection will reveal the following differences. The leaves, which are cut into tapering lobes and coarsely toothed, are heart-shaped at the base. When young they are slightly downy beneath, but when mature they are smooth on both sides. Though the flowers are similar in size and colour to those of the white beam, the fruit is smaller (1/3 inch in diameter), less globular, and more like a large haw, though the colour is greenish brown. The flowers appear in April and May, and the fruit, which is of a very dry, juiceless character, is ripe in November. In some localities these fruits are marketed, but they require to be kept like medlars until decay sets in, before they are fit to be eaten. Mountain Ash, or Rowan, Pyrus aucuparia. Little description of the Mountain Ash is needed, for in recent years it has come so much into favour that it is now one of the commonest of the trees planted in little suburban gardens and forecourts. Its hardiness, its indifference to the character of the soil, the fact that other plants will grow beneath it, and the absence of need for pruning, all these points unite to make it suitable and popular for growth in restricted spaces. But the wood on the hillside is the natural home of the Mountain Ash, and in the Highlands its vertical range extends to 2,600 feet above sea level. The Mountain Ash attains a height of from 30 to 50 feet, and has a straight, clean bole, clothed in smooth grey bark, scarred horizontally as though it had been scored with a knife. All the branches have an upward tendency, and the shoots bear the long feathery leaves, whose division into 6 or 8 pairs of slender leaflets suggest the Ash, from which part of its name has been borrowed. Gazing on this tree either in flower or fruit, it would be quite unnecessary to explain that it is not even remotely allied to Fraxinus excelsior, and that the similarity of leaf division is the only point of resemblance between them. These leaflets have toothed edges, are paler on the underside, and in a young condition the midrib and nerves are hairy. The creamy white fragrant flowers are like little hawthorn blossoms, though only half the size, and they appear in dense clusters (cymes) in May or June. The fruit are miniature apples of the size of holly berries, bright scarlet without and yellow within. They ripen in September, and are then a great attraction to thrushes, blackbirds, and their kind, who rapidly strip the tree of them. Though this at first sight may appear like frustrating the tree's object in producing fruit, it is not really so, the attractive flesh being a mere bait to induce the birds to pass the seeds through their intestines and thus get them sown far and wide. By this method the process of germination is considerably hastened, whereas by hand sowing the seeds lie in the earth for 18 months before shooting. All the species of Pyrus produce their fruits with this object, the larger more or less brownish ones being intended to attract mammals, and the smaller red coloured to tempt birds. The seeds have leathery jackets to protect them from the action of the digestive fluids, and are further wrapped in a parchmenty, bony, or wooden core (endocarp) with a similar object. In the case of the Rowan this is very like wood. In the south of Britain the Mountain Ash is chiefly grown as underwood, and used as a nurse for oaks and other timber trees which soon outgrow it and kill it, so that in the woods it is seldom allowed to grow into a fully developed tree, but, thanks to the birds, it comes up on the common and the hillside, and has a chance of producing its masses of ruby fruits. Its wood is tough and elastic, but owing to the smallness of its girth, it does not produce timber of any size. Still it makes admirable poles and hoops. The word Rowan is one of the most interesting of tree names, and connects the still existing superstitious practices of our northern counties, not only with the old Norsemen, but with the ancient Hindus who spoke the Sanskrit tongue. The word is spelled in many ways which connect it with the Old Norse runa, a charm, it being supposed to have power to ward off the effects of the evil eye. In earlier times runa was the Sanskrit appellation for a magician. Rune stafas were staves cut from the rowan tree upon which runes were inscribed. Until quite recently the respect for its magical properties was shown in the north by fixing a branch of rowan to the cattle byre as a charm against the evil designs of witches, warlocks, and others of that kidney. In this connection we may quote also from Evelyn's Sylva. He says: "Ale and beer brewed with these berries, being ripe, is an incomparable drink, familiar in Wales, where this tree is reputed so sacred that there is not a churchyard without one of them planted in it, as among us the yew. And so on a certain day in the year everybody religiously wears a cross made of the wood, and the tree is by some authors called Fraxinus Cambro Britannica, reputed to be a preservative against fascinations and evil spirits, whence perhaps we call it witchen, the boughs being stuck about the house, or the wood used for walking staves." Among the numerous names of the Mountain Ash are Fowler's Service, or Servus, from Cerevisia, a fermented drink; Cock drunks, Hen drunks, from the belief that fowls were intoxicated by eating the berries; Quickbeam, White Ash, from the colour of the flowers; Witchwood, and Witchen. Quickbeam is an allusion to the constant movement of foliage, quick being the Anglo Saxon quick, alive. Witchwood and Witchen are also forms of quick. The true Service, Pyrus sorbus, closely resembles the Mountain Ash in habit and foliage, but it is not a native of Britain, though it used to be claimed as such, on account of its growing in the more mountainous parts of Cornwall, and in Weir Forest, Worcestershire. The latter, however, is the only service tree that could put in such a claim, for it grows (or grew?) far from habitations or cultivated land, and the presumption is that it has not owed its introduction to man. Still, one swallow does not make a summer, and a solitary wild tree does not give the species a title to be reckoned as British. It is occasionally cultivated here, and its portrait, with a brief account of its points of difference from the Mountain Ash, may be useful. A comparison of the photographs from the boles of the two species will show a great difference, that of the Mountain Ash being smooth, whilst that of the Service is rugged. The leaf is similarly broken up into paired leaflets, but these are broader, and are downy on both upper and lower sides. The white flowers are as large as May blossoms, and the fruits, which may be either apple shaped or pear shaped, are greenish brown, with rusty specks, and 4 times the size of rowan berries. In winter, when there are no leaves, flowers, nor fruits to help in the distinction, the bark may be taken in conjunction with the leaf buds, which are green and smooth in this species, whilst those of the Mountain Ash are black and downy. The fruit may be eaten after it has begun to decay, as in the case of the Medlar. Loudon describes the wood of the Service as the hardest and heaviest of all the trees indigenous to Europe, fine grained, red tinted, susceptible of a high polish, and much in request in France for all purposes where strength and durability are needed. He further says that it takes 2 centuries to attain its full stature, 50 to 60 feet, and lives to so great an age that some specimens of it are believed to be upwards of 1000 years old. We have already made reference to the meaning of the name Service. Another name, Sorb, from Latin sorbeo, shows closer affinity for the fermented liquor indicated by Service, for it means drink down. A third name is Chequer tree, which Dr. Prior tells us is an antique pronunciation of the word choker, in allusion to the unpalatable fruit, fit to choke one. Choke pear, it will be remembered, is a synonym of the wild pear. Britain and Holland regard the name Chequer tree as having no connection with choking, but an indication of the checkered or spotted appearance of the fruit. The Medlar, Pyrus germanica, is a small tree, native of Persia, Asia Minor, and Greece, and which is generally held to occur wild in England and the Channel Islands only as an escape from cultivation. The theory is that the tree was introduced at some date prior to 1596, when we have record of its being in cultivation here, and that the Medlar trees growing in the hedges of South and Middle England are from seeds of those cultivated trees, which have been sown by birds, or more probably mammals, who have eaten the fruit. The fact that it is not found in woods is taken as evidence that it is non-indigenous. Such evidence is not the most convincing, but it is the best available. It should be noted, however, that the agents credited with its distribution along our hedgerows have free access to woods, and that if these places were favourable to the growth of the Medlar, we should probably find it there, whether indigenous or exotic. Much more conclusive, we think, is its restricted distribution abroad, as already indicated. One would not expect to find a tree whose nearest home is Greece leaping over the whole of Europe and appearing as an indigene in Britain. In its wild condition the Medlar is a much branched and spiny tree, from 10 to 20 feet high, in these respects resembling the hawthorn, but like the pear it puts off its defences when cultivated. Its leaves are large and undivided, of an oblong lance shape, downy beneath, and sometimes with the edges very finely toothed. The solitary white flowers are large, 1½ inches across, with a woolly calyx, whose 5 tips expand into leafy growths. They appear in May or June, and are succeeded by brown fruits, an inch or less across, which may be described as round, with a depressed top, which is ornamented with the remains of the calyx lobes. They ripen in October or November. Hawthorn (Cratægus oxyacantha). Though distributed as a wild tree throughout the length and breadth of the British Islands, we are all more familiar with the Hawthorn as planted material in the construction of hedges, and this is a use to which it has been put ever since land was plotted out and enclosed. For the word is Anglo Saxon hagethorn, and signifies hedge thorn. The man in the street would say without hesitation that hawthorn means the thorn that produces haws, but the philologist would tell him that it is only a modern and erroneous practice to apply the name of the hedge to the fruit of the hedge thorn. It is also whitethorn, to make the distinction between its light grey bark and that of the blackthorn, and may because of the period when it chiefly attracts attention. Where the hawthorn is allowed its natural growth, it attains a height of 40 feet, with a circumference between 3 and 10 feet. Such a tree is represented in our photograph. On our commons, where in their youth the hawthorns have to submit to much mutilation from browsing animals, their growth is spoiled. But though some of these never become more than bushes tangled up with the blackthorn into small thickets, there are others that form a distinct bole and a round head of branches from 10 to 20 feet high, which in late May, or, more frequently, early June, look like solid masses of snow. The characteristic of the tree which makes it so valuable as fencing material is found in its numerous branches, supporting a network of twigs so dense that even a hand may not be pushed among them without incurring serious scratches. That this character is not confined to it as a hedge shrub is clearly shown by the winter photograph of the leafless tree. The well known lobed leaves are very variable both in size and shape, and the degree to which they are cut. They are a favourite food with horses and oxen, who would demolish the hedges that confine them to the fields, but for the spines which protect the older branches at least. The white flowers are about 3/4 of an inch across, borne in numerous corymbs. The pink anthers give relief to the uniform whiteness of the petals. The flowers, though usually sweet scented, occasionally give forth a very unpleasant odour. The familiar fruits, too, instead of their usual crimson, are yellow occasionally, as in the Holly. In favourable years these are so plentiful that they quite kill the effect of the dark green leaves, and when such a tree is seen in the October sunshine it appears to be glowing with fire to its centre. Beneath the ripe mealy flesh there is a hard bony core, in whose cells the seeds are protected from digestion when the fruit has been swallowed by a bird. The Hawthorn is said to live from a century to 2 centuries, growing very slowly after it has reached a height of about 15 feet. Its wood is both hard and tough, and the name of the genus has reference to that fact, being derived from the Greek kratos, strength. The Strawberry tree (Arbutus unedo). Not in the woods or by waysides in Great Britain will the Strawberry tree be found, though it may be seen in parks and gardens; but in parts of the Emerald Isle it is native. Killarney, Muckross, and Bantry are given by Hooker as its Irish stations, but we have also found it in the woods at Woodstock, County Kilkenny, in a situation where it seemed unlikely such a tree would be planted. It does not attain a large size, ordinarily about 10 or 12 feet, though in cultivation it may attain to 20 or even 30 feet. The bark is rough and scaly, tinged with red, and twisted. The leathery leaves are more or less oval, 2 or 3 inches long, with toothed edges and hairy stalks. Although arranged alternately on the shoots, they present the appearance at a little distance of being clustered, rosette fashion, at the tips of the twigs. The creamy white flowers are clustered in drooping racemes at the ends of the twigs, and are about 1/3 of an inch across, bell shaped. When the seed eggs have been fertilized, the corollas drop off, so that in the flowering season (September and October) the ground beneath will usually be found strewn with them. The fruit is a round berry of an orange red hue, whose surface is completely studded with little points. As these berries do not come to maturity until about 14 months after the flowers have dropped their corollas, we may see both flowers and almost full formed fruit on the tree at the same time. They are not eatable until quite ripe, and even then they are not to everybody's taste, on account of their austerity. In truth, we have it on the testimony of Pliny that the old Latin name unedo, now enshrined in the specific scientific name, was given to it because to eat one of these tree strawberries was a sufficiently extensive acquaintance for most persons. It is perhaps unnecessary to add that in spite of the name there is no relationship existing between this tree and the Strawberry, nor is there more than a faint superficial resemblance between the fruits of the two plants. The Strawberry belongs to the great Rose family, whilst the nearest British connections of the Arbutus are the Bilberries and Heaths. Section 7 of Wayside and Woodland Trees, a Pocket Guide to the British Sylva, by Edward Stepp. Recording is in the public domain. Native Trees and Shrubs, Part 7. Dogwood (Cornus sanguinea). Among the constituents of the broad hedgerow and the copse that borders many a county road, the dogwood or cornel is apt to be overlooked as privet, to which its similar, opposite leaves and clusters of small white flowers bear a superficial resemblance. It has a great variety of local names, though it must be admitted that many of these show close connections one with another. This, however, makes them not less interesting, but indicates how ancient and general is the underlying idea which has given rise to them. Dogwood had originally no connection with dogs, but was the wood of which dags, goads, and skewers were made, because, as the Latin cornus signifies, it was of horny hardness and toughness. When the etymology got changed by the substitution of an O for an A in dag, it was also called dog tree, dogberry, dog timber, and houndberry tree; and to explain the name it was said that the bark made an excellent wash for many dogs. Gatter, gattin, gaiter, gaitreberry are all from the Anglo Saxon gadtrio, or goad tree. Gadrise means goad shrub (gadris), and the gatteridge is gatra rouge, from the red colour of the bare twigs. But we must not overlook the shrub itself whilst considering its wealth of names. It grows to a height of 6 or 8 feet, and is clothed with opposite oval leaves, which are smooth on both surfaces. The honeyed flowers are produced in June or July, at the extremities of the branches in dense round cymes. Individually they are small, 1/3 of an inch across, opaque white, with 4 petals and 4 stamens, which mature concurrently with the stigma. They give out an unpleasant odour, which appears to render them more attractive to flies and small beetles. The flowers are succeeded by small green berries, which turn purple black about September, and are exceedingly bitter. They are said to yield an oil which is used in France for soap making, and has been here burned in lamps. The Dogwood is widely distributed over Britain as far north as Westmoreland. It does not occur in Scotland, and is rare in Ireland. It would seem as though its place in North Britain was taken by a herbaceous species, the dwarf cornel (Cornus suecica), which grows upon alpine moorlands from Yorkshire as far north as Sunderlandshire. The stems of this, which have as many inches to their stature as the shrub has feet, die down annually. Its minute flowers are purplish instead of white, and its smaller berries red. Wayfaring tree (Viburnum lantana). The Wayfaring tree has a number of names by which it is known locally, but the one we have used is generally known, though it may have the disadvantage of being a comparatively modern one whose parentage is known to us. The origin of most of these popular names is lost in the mists of antiquity. John Gerard, whose Herbal was published in 1597, noting its fondness for roadside hedges and thickets, called it Wayfaring tree, or Wayfaring man's tree. Thereupon Parkinson, nearly half a century later, remarks, "Gerard calleth it in English the Wayfaring tree, but I know no travailer doth take either pleasure or profit by it more than any other hedge trees." Our own experience serves to prove that wayfarers, as a class, have improved since Parkinson's day, for we have frequently been questioned in the Surrey chalk districts at various seasons respecting the bold plant, in winter showing its large naked buds, all rough with starry hairs, which keep off frost, as well as do the many scales and thick varnish of horse chestnut buds; in the summer the broad hairy leaves looking as dusty as a miller's coat, whilst above them spread the slightly rounded heads of white flowers; later, when the flowers are succeeded by bunches of glowing coral beads, that in autumn become beads of jet. It is not confined to the chalk hills, but as far north as Yorkshire may be looked for wherever the soil is dry, though it finds this condition best on the chalk, and is there especially abundant. It is not indigenous in either Scotland or Ireland. Though it grows to a height of 20 feet in places, it can never properly be called a tree. Its downy stems are never very stout. They branch a good deal, and it should be noted that the branches are always given off in pairs, a branch from each side of the stem at exactly the same height. The leaves are produced in the same order. These leaves, which are 3 or 4 inches in length, are much wrinkled, heart shaped, with a blunt small end, white beneath, and the edges very finely toothed. The flower cluster is a cyme, and it should be noted that all the white flowers comprised in it are of the same size and form, the corollas being funnel shaped with 5 lobes, and the 5 stamens are extruded from the mouth. The flowers, which are joined to the stalks, are out in May and June, and the flattened oval fruits that follow are, as already stated, at first red, then black. The local names for this shrub include Mealy tree, Whipcrop, Cotton tree, Cottoner, Coventry, Lythewort, Lythy tree, Twistwood, Whitewood. Mealy tree, Cotton tree, Cottoner, and Whitewood all have obvious reference to the appearance of the young shoots and leaves, due to the presence of the white hairs with which they are covered. Lythewort and Lythy tree, also Twistwood and Whipcrop, indicate the supple and elastic character of the branches, which are often used instead of withy to bind up a bundle of sticks or vegetables, or to make a hoop for a gate fastener. In Germany the shoots, when only a year old, are used in basket weaving, and, when a year or two older, serve for pipe stems. The Guelder Rose (Viburnum opulus). Although the Guelder Rose and the Wayfaring tree are very closely related, the differences between them are so great that there is little danger of any person with ordinary powers of observation confusing them. The Guelder Rose does not grow so tall as its congener, 12 feet being about the extreme height to which it attains in a wild state, and ordinarily it is several feet less. It is not so fond of dry soils, and is more frequently found in the copse, where it is not subject to the extremes of heat and cold that have produced the hairy covering of V. lantana. The stems and branches are quite smooth, and the leaf buds are wrapped in scales. The young leaves, it is true, when they break from the bud, are covered with down, but they throw this off as they expand to their full size and become smooth on either side. Instead of the leaf being heart shaped, it is divided into 3 deeply toothed lobes, and it will be noted that at the base of the leaf stalk there is a pair of slender stipules, which lantana never has. The cyme or flower head is more rounded, and whilst the mass of flowers are of the same size (1/4 inch) as those of the Wayfaring tree, those in the outer row are 3 times the size, but they are entirely without stamens or pistil. It would appear that in order to make the flower cluster more conspicuous and thus attract insects, the material that should have gone to furnish these organs has been used up in the broader and whiter corolla. The inner and perfect flowers are creamy white, bell shaped, and they secrete honey. Both stamens and stigma mature simultaneously. The fruits are almost round, and of a clear translucent red. Respecting these fruits we cannot forbear from quoting a remark of Hamerton's. He says, writing as the French recorder of the Sylvan, "For anyone who enjoys the sight of red berries in the most jewel like splendour, there is nothing in winter like the viburnum, the species we call Viorne aubier; and if you meet with a fine specimen just when it is caught by the level rays of a crimson sunset, you will behold a shrub that seems to have come from that garden of Aladdin where the fruit of the trees were jewels. These fruits, though enticing to the sight and juicy, are nauseous to the taste." The name Guelder Rose is a strange case of transference from a cultivated to a wild plant. The variation sterilis, in which all the flowers are like the outer row in the normal cluster, was first cultivated in Gelderland. So Gerard tells us that it is called in the Dutch Gelders Roos, in English Gelder's Rose. In the Cotswolds it is known as King's Crown, from the King of the May having been crowned with a chaplet of it. Another name for it is Water Elder, presumably given on account of the similar appearance of the flower clusters in Viburnum and Sambucus. The distribution of the Guelder Rose as a wild plant extends northwards to Caithness, although it is rare in Scotland. It occurs throughout Ireland. The Elder (Sambucus nigra). The Elder is more a tree of the wayside than of the woodland, often of low bushy growth. But where it finds good loamy soil with abundant moisture, it attains a height of 20 feet. None of our trees grows more rapidly in its earliest years, and any bit of its living wood will readily take root, so that its presence in the hedge is often due to planting for the purpose of rapidly erecting a live screen. Its quickly grown juicy shoots soon harden into a tube of tough wood with a core of pith which is readily extracted, and renders the tube available for a pea shooter, a pop gun, or a music pipe. Such uses have been known from remote antiquity, probably one might say from the beginnings of the human race. The ancient Greeks called it sambuke, from its wood having been used in the making of musical instruments. In the north of Britain it is known as boar tree, or bottery, from the ease with which this cleaning out of the pith is effected, and it is pretty clear that the more general name of elder also has relation to the tubular shoots. Piers Plowman calls the tree Eller, a name that survives in Kent, Sussex, Lincoln, East Yorks, and Cheshire. This word, according to Prior, is derived from the Anglo Saxon eller and ellern, and seems to mean kindler, a name which we may suppose that it acquired from its hollow branches being used like the bamboo in the tropics to blow up a fire. It is thus probable that the housewife got her bellows, the musician his pipe, and the schoolboy his pop gun, all from the same source. The stems are coated with a grey corky bark, and the younger divisions of the branches show an angular section when cut. When old, the wood becomes hard and heavy, and has been used as a substitute for box. The leaf is divided into 5, 7, or 9 oval leaflets with toothed edges. The flower is of the form that botanists describe as rotate, that is, the corolla forms a very short tube, from the mouth of which 5 petal-like lobes spread flat. This is 1/4 of an inch broad, and creamy white in colour, giving out an odour which some persons like, but which the writer considers offensive. Large numbers of these small flowers are gathered into flat topped cymes, 5 or 6 inches in diameter. The primary stalks of these cymes are 5 in number. The flowers are succeeded by small globular berries, ultimately of a purple black hue and of mawkish flavour, which are yet much sought after by country people for the making of elderberry wine, which they credit with marvellous medicinal powers. In truth, the elder still retains among rustic folk much of the reputation it had when John Evelyn praised it so highly in his Sylva, where he says, "If the medicinal properties of the leaves, bark, berries, etc., were thoroughly known, I cannot tell what our countryman could ail for which he might not fetch a remedy from every hedge, either for sickness or wound." Occasionally one may find in the hedgerow an elder with its leaflets deeply cut into very slender lobes, so that the leaf has a resemblance to that of fool's parsley. This is an escape from cultivation, a garden variety, laciniata, known as a cut-leaved or parsley-leaved elder. The Box (Buxus sempervirens). Though frequently to be met with in parks and ornamental grounds, there are only a few places in the country where the Box is really indigenous. These are in the counties of Surrey, Kent, Buckingham, and Gloucester. On the famous Box Hill, near Dorking, in Surrey, it may be seen attaining to its proper proportions as a small tree, and in sufficient abundance to form groves covering a considerable area. It grows to a height of 15 or 20 feet, with a girth of about 20 inches. Its slender branches are clothed with small oblong leathery leaves, which give out a peculiar and distinctive odour. They are about an inch in length, polished on the upper side, evergreen and opposite. The flowers may be looked for from January to May, and will be found clustered between the leaf and the stem. These are quite small and inconspicuous, of a whitish green colour, and the sexes are in separate flowers. The uppermost one in the centre of each cluster is a female flower, the others are males. The males consist of 4 petals, enclosing a rudimentary ovary, from beneath which spring 4 stamens. The sepals of the female flower vary in number from 4 to 12, and enclose a rounded ovary with 3 styles, which are ripe and protruded before the males open. This develops into the 3-celled capsule, with 3 diverging beaks, which correspond with the styles, and in each cell there are 1 or 2 black seeds. The growth of the tree is very slow, and in consequence the grain of its wood is very fine. It is also very hard, and so heavy that alone among native woods it will not float in water. On account of its fine grain and hardness, it is in request by the tuner and mathematical instrument maker, and was formerly largely used by the wood engraver for wood cuts. Since the introduction of the photographic process blocks, the industry of preparing boxwood for the engraver must have become all but extinct, and for that reason box plantations must be less valuable assets than formerly. It is on record that when the Box Hill trees were cut in 1815, the fall realized nearly £10,000. Box Hill is in no sense a plantation. Its slopes and summit are clothed with a natural mixed wood of box, oak, beech, and yew. Beneath every box tree will be found hundreds of seedlings of various ages. Some of those may be seen in our photograph, which depicts naturally grown box trees on the famous hill. It will be noted that their habit is widely different from that of the more bush-like forms so familiar in gardens. Section 8.